the Durham for Refugees Festival, which included live music, I need to turn my page, poetry, food stalls and workshops. And we are so excited to have Beth speak to us today about the challenges and highlights of setting up a society, particularly as a young person. So yeah, over to you, Beth. We're so excited to see what you have to say.
Thank you, Mary. It's really lovely to be here. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Let me know if this works. I've got a couple of slides to share with you. Okay, can you see this?
Yeah, we can. It's good.
Fantastic. Cool. So yeah, my name is Beth. I am living and working in London now. I work for a small social enterprise, basically supporting people to transition their career into the social sector. But that's not what I'm talking about today. I will be talking about my experience at Durham Uni, where I set up Durham for Refugees, which, as Mary said, is a student group supporting refugees and asylum seekers. So I set it up in my first year of uni, and then I ran it in my second year and my fourth year, and really just going to share some of the insights I got from doing that. In terms of structure, I am going to talk you through a bit about why I set it up, and then go into sort of what we did and how we did it, and finally just take you through some of the lessons that we learned along the way. So the why. I've put quite grandly, a bit more grandly than I would want on this slide, the need, the will and the skill, but I will talk you through what I mean by that. The need, I remember quite vividly sitting at home in 2015 with my mum and watching on the news the refugee crisis, in inverted commas, and it obviously was not the first time that people had been forced to leave their homes, but it was on the news a lot in 2015, you might remember. And I remember thinking, you know, I cannot imagine what these people have been through in their home countries, the journeys they faced. And now seeing them in these supposedly safe host countries, you saw a lot of pictures of Calais and the refugee camps there. I was just really shocked by the way they were being treated in these countries that were meant to be safe. And I thought at the time I would like to do something, but I didn't immediately do anything. I was in my final year of school, and then went off to uni, again, didn't immediately do anything. But there was a talk a few months into my first year, and this girl, this student, spoke about her experiences volunteering in Calais and in Dunkirk. She spoke about the conditions there in northern France where these refugees and asylum seekers were living. Yeah, she also spoke a little bit about her personal story. She'd come over to the northeast of England when she was 5 from Kurdistan. And it was a really powerful, really inspiring talk that she gave. And at the end of it, she sort of said, we've got all of these students here. We should really, why don't we do something, whatever it is, to support these people. She couldn't at the time, she was on a work placement year, but a few of us got together at the end of that talk and started plotting about what we could do, how we were going to do it. And I put as well that the will and the skill, the will, we all wanted to do something, and the skill, really, I just think we had the time, we had enough resources to start something, and we did. So just to talk a little bit about how we did it. We started off after that talk with an open meeting where anyone who was interested could come and brainstorm ideas on the kind of things students could do. And at that point, there was no formal structure, nothing official, but we started off with really low input events. So we did a quiz at the Students' Union, raising a little bit of money for a charity in Calais. And really at that time, we also did a lot of facilitating students to go and volunteer at other externally planned events. And then that summer, we did a few trips to volunteer in Calais, taking sort of 6 to 8 students at a time to go and spend a couple of weeks volunteering, distributing clothes, distributing food in Calais. And really, from all of that, we saw that there was appetite there, students wanted to help. So in the next academic year, we decided we'd become a ratified student group. And the benefits of that really were that we got a bank account, so we could apply for grants. And we also got some insurance. Up until that point, for the events that we'd done, we'd sort of piggybacked off other people's insurance. But at that point, you know, we could do our own things. And quite early on as well, we collaborated with Durham City of Sanctuary, an organisation in the city that was already doing great work supporting local people who were seeking asylum in the northeast. And from there, we grew, our events got bigger, our volunteering initiatives got bigger. And yeah, now it's been going about 5 years. I'm no longer involved, but I watch quite excitedly the group and what it's doing and how it's growing. So yeah. A little bit about what we did. I thought it was quite important from the outset to have aims and a focus to the work we were doing. I think a couple of people have said it can seem quite overwhelming, you know, all of the problems facing refugees, facing asylum seekers. So we focused on 4 things, and I'll take you through those now. Fundraising, we did sponsored walks, gigs, club nights, lots and lots of different things, and always sent the money to one of our chosen charities. We also worked with Durham City of Sanctuary to support people seeking asylum or refugees in the northeast. So they were already running some English classes. We facilitated so that students could volunteer at these classes, but we also set up like a language exchange. So we got the Arabic students to pair up with some of the Syrian refugees living in Durham, and they did like a one-to-one language exchange. And I think that was quite nice because it was less, you know, teacher-student relationship and more of a, I learned something from you, you learn something from me. I think there's some quite nice friendships that formed out of that as well. So yeah, we also set up a kids club. Durham City of Sanctuary were running a drop-in for people to come and get advice and support. And they found that while the parents of these refugee families were trying to get this advice, the kids were running around. So we saw a bit of a need there that we could fill, and we set up the necessary DBS checks and what have you, and set up just a mini kids club on that Saturday afternoon drop-in where we could keep the kids entertained. Yeah, briefly, we also did the volunteer trips each summer to Calais. And we did a lot of campaigning and awareness events. So film screenings, panel discussions. I think Mary mentioned the festival, this full day, that was kind of fundraising. We had music and we were raising money, but we also had stalls and talks, also raising awareness of refugee rights and that kind of thing. So yeah, just to deep dive quickly into one of the events we ran. It was called Taste of Syria, and really basically we got the Syrian families we'd been talking to, working with, to cook this big Syrian buffet, really amazing food, and really like a massive quantity. We had big under the bed storage containers of tabbouleh and hummus and falafels. It was great. And they cooked this food, and we invited anybody who wanted to come and eat the food, chat to new people. They ended up being a bit of Arabic dancing at the end, which was great. And it was a paid for event. We sold tickets. We raised, I think, about £1,000 each time for our chosen charities. But as well as being fundraising, it's not quite awareness, but it was a really nice way of bringing different people from the community together. You can see them all chatting on that photo. But we had the Syrian refugee families, we had local Durham people, and we had the students as well. And I think, you know, everyone likes food. So if you are thinking you want to do something similar, food is, well, difficult in these times, but food is always a good thing to congregate around. And there's another picture of the food there. So yeah, I'm aware I haven't got too many more minutes left, but just a few of the lessons we learned. Collaborate. I think Taste of Syria was one of our most successful events, and we stole it. We'd been to a similar event in Darlington near Durham earlier in the year, and we liked it, so we copied it, and I kind of think we did it bigger and we did it better. Also, I think it's so important, this could have been a point on its own, work with the people who you're trying to support. You can see a picture of Sabatha, who was teaching us, I mean, she did most of it, but teaching us to make vine leaves ready for Taste of Syria. And like the people I met, the refugees I met in the Northeast, some of the coolest, most inspiring, resilient people I know. And I think it's easy to, I don't know, victimize, and it's also easy to do something with the best of intentions and it to have not great consequences. So I think really just chat to the people you're wanting to help with, humans to humans, see what's useful, what's needed, what's not. And again, we worked a lot with City of Sanctuary and with other organisations to make sure we were filling a need and not repeating something that was already being done. And then quickly be resourceful. There's one of our volunteers there who is brandishing a sign for the festival. We did a lot of our events. We had a lot of fun creating signs and decorations that we'd scavenged from skips and the like. And it wasn't perfect, but there's something fun and nice about just cobbling together, working together. I think there is some charm and some fun in that. And then finally, ask. I was really pleasantly surprised during the few years that I was working in Durham by how much people want to help. And just how willing people were. There's a picture there of Professor Maggie O'Neill, who was speaking at one of our events. I'd met her at a previous refugee support event and said, you know, we're doing this panel discussion. Would you be interested in talking? And she said yes. So yeah, I think if just ask. The worst thing people can say is no. And then finally, to leave you on this slightly cheesy sentiment, but it really does resonate with me. Dare to dream and organise to deliver. Dare to dream, I think if you're feeling like you want to do something, aim high, be creative, think of all the things you could possibly do. But equally, organise to deliver. I think that some of the biggest challenges we faced were boring, bureaucratic things, and you do have to jump through some hoops to do some of the biggest scale events, but it's worth putting that bit of planning in. And you can see on the left a picture from a festival of everyone dancing to the Crossings band, and on the right a picture from Taste of Syria, where everybody ended up spontaneously dancing, which was great. A couple of the men started, and then before we knew it, everyone was holding hands and dancing. So yeah, thank you for listening. And I think we have another breakout activity now, so I will stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beth. That was really insightful and really encouraging and uplifting, actually, to know that there is so much that we can do, and we can do without all the resources that we, might think we need. But yeah, we're going to go back into breakout rooms. These ones are only going to be 5 minutes long, and these are the questions. So in the previous breakout room, we began discussing what we will do in response to what we've heard today. So look at your action or actions again. What barriers might you face and how can you overcome them? And is there a concrete next step you would like to commit to? Post it on the Jamboard. And I believe the link for the Jamboard will be made available somewhere. And if we could hear back from groups 3, 4 and 5 this time when we come back in. So make sure you've nominated someone or forced someone to speak if that's how you roll. So yeah, we'll go into our 5-minute breakout rooms now. Who is a lawyer and researcher specialising in migration, technology and human rights. She's currently working on a project studying the human rights impacts of artificial intelligence and automated technologies on migration control with European digital rights. She's worked on forced migration and refugee issues since 2008 as a settlement worker, researcher and lawyer. And she's joining us from Lesbos in Greece, where she's currently working on the refugee crisis. So thank you so much for being here, Petra. We are so excited to have you and to listen to what you've got to say. And I will stop talking and pass over to you now.
Sorry, 1 second. Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry. I seem to be having some connection issues right at this crucial moment. I hope that you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay, well, assume you can. I'm so sorry if there's a bit of a delay in my connection. I am calling in from Greece, and so sometimes my internet is not the best. About that. Thank you so much for having me with you today, and I really appreciated.
I think Petra might be having some technical issues, so we'll just hang on in there and hope that she comes back at some point.
I'm so sorry. I think I'm back.
Yes, you're back. This is great.
Yes, I am back. For whatever reason, it just booted me off of Zoom. That has never happened to me in the last 6 months of this pandemic.
That was not intentional, we promise.
My apologies. Okay, let's start again. Thank you so much for having me with you today. And I really appreciated the interventions of the other speakers. And what I hope to do is just share a few insights from the work that I do as a refugee lawyer and a researcher, and also hopefully be able to get a good discussion going afterwards. Basically, I have been working in the area of forced migration for a number of years now, and I am what you might call a reluctant lawyer. By that I mean the law in and of itself sometimes, actually more often than not, acts as an instrument of violence and control, and it's very difficult to find oneself as a working professional working in the law while also seeing the kind of practices and the normalization of this kind of policy violence that is inflicted on people. I think Mika really nicely highlighted this in some of her points that she was sharing with her experiences with the Home Office. And this, unfortunately, is a common thread that a lot of people who are asylum seekers and who find themselves needing protection in other countries face. As someone who tries to understand kind of the big picture, or the why states and why government entities act the way they do, it's been fascinating to try and look at it from an ecosystem perspective, to try and understand why the law works the way it does to make life sometimes more difficult for people than before, how policies exacerbate some of these issues, and now most recently how technology and surveillance makes sometimes the situation worse. So what I'll do today is I'll just share some findings and highlights from the work that I've been doing here in Greece, but then also maybe leave with you some broader questions about why the current refugee law regime might be the way that it is. Because I think having a broader kind of top-down understanding of how power operates in this system is really useful. Because in this ecosystem that we are seeing, where we are increasingly, for example, facing anti-migrant sentiments, criminalization of migration, or the xenophobia that is rising around the world, and now also with COVID, concern is that the freedom of movement right will be impacted. People will be having much more of a difficult time actually claiming asylum under the current rules as they exist, but also perhaps that the rules in the legal system is inadequate to really deal with the kind of complexity that arises when a person has to leave their country and come somewhere else. Now, again, I am a reluctant lawyer in the sense that I see the benefit perhaps of using some of these frameworks like human rights, human dignity, and all these things that get written down in local and international laws as a way to try and pin down responsibility or get the state to understand that these are my obligations to a particular person. But unfortunately, oftentimes, the ways that these policies play out in practice creates really deep holes through which people can fall. And unfortunately, even though the law tries to get us to think in these boxes, like you have to be a refugee in order to qualify for certain things, or even the refugee definition in and of itself is very, very based around factors, for example, that don't really account for people's complex lived experience. Now it's getting even more complicated because as more and more people move around the world, and governments, particularly in Europe and in the UK, are creating increasingly more difficulties for people to cross borders, what does this actually look like in practice? Basically, at the end of the day, just because we have a legal system that says, you can qualify for refugee status if you meet these 5 grounds. You can go through all these processes. The processes in and of themselves are oftentimes imperfect and unfair. And now it actually is becoming more and more difficult for people to get to a country of safety where they can even claim asylum in the first place. And this manifests or happens in different ways. For example, we're seeing the rise of immigration detention across the world. We're seeing countries across Europe, for example, and the UK also, pushing their borders further and further from the kind of physical location of the actual border, and using different ways to make it more difficult for people to even arrive in the first place. So this is what I've been doing here in Greece and in the Mediterranean, trying to understand how this kind of panopticon, or this confusing arena where things are happening, is playing out in practice. And trying to understand this from what we call this kind of regime of migration management. Because again, countries want to be able to strengthen their borders, remove themselves from the ability to, have a humanity and dignity in the middle of the decision-making process, and make everything as kind of sterile and objective as possible. But of course, objectivity doesn't really happen the way we think it happens on the ground. What I want to do now is, just with the few minutes that I have left, is to illustrate some of these ideas with some photographs that a colleague of mine took. Those of you who are maybe keeping on top of refugee issues globally might have heard that in September, the largest refugee camp in Greece, Moria, burnt down and basically rendered thousands of people without shelter. And they were very quickly and hastily put into a new camp on basically a peninsula that is bordered on 3 sides by the ocean. It's incredibly windy. It's so windy that you can't even really have a conversation when you're walking around. And this is again supported by surveillance technologies, over-policing, criminalization, and again, this kind of presence of control. So I'm just going to share my screen with you if I can. I seem to have trouble sharing my screen. I'm sorry, you know what? I will share my photos with you in the chat instead. But again, they just illustrate some of the ways that the police presence is there, drones we are seeing increasingly, and this kind of system of control that makes life much more difficult for people. And what I'm trying to do here is just to highlight for you that even though the law might have an understanding of how, certain requirements are in practice, are in place rather, based on, for example, different conventions, or how different countries like the UK import those kind of laws into their own domestic system, what actually happens on the ground is really, really different. Just because we have a certain legal system on the books or on paper doesn't mean that it actually functions that way in practice. And the Greek example is a poignant one, because you have, for example, Greece is part of the European Union, right? And the idea is that a European Union country has to follow certain rules around asylum and refugee processing. But instead, you have people who have been languishing in these camps for years. And we don't really know what is going to happen, how quickly they will be processed, if they will be processed. And some of the living conditions there are quite terrible. I'm sorry that I can't seem to share my screen, but I will send you some photos just so you get a sense of the kind of depravity of the situation, and just how countries and different entities too are making things more difficult, making lives more difficult for people on the ground. Now, I know that my time is running out, but what I really want to leave you with is some bigger ideas I think that we need to think about. Because at the end of the day, when you look at refugee law and the way it is practiced, it is oftentimes a very violent enterprise. It's a project that is trying to force people to fit their very complex stories into a box in order to meet certain legal definitions, in order to meet quotas, and also to then play into this idea that we have to strengthen our borders and that countries at the end of the day are the ones that are making decisions. And for you, for example, in the UK is taking a really, really hardline stance on this. There's been an increase of people trying to cross the English Channel and claim asylum on arrival. But we are increasingly seeing messaging from the Home Office, from the UK government, about using increasingly draconian and violent ways to strengthen the border. For example, going as far as saying that they want to be using netting to be able to capture boats, putting people on oil rigs instead of actually processing their asylum applications on land, using drones, and these kind of invasive, really problematic technologies. I will share with you some articles about this if you're interested, and I will also share a recent report that we had come out this week, basically looking at how these technologies are playing out in practice. And for those of you who are interested at the kind of international level, there's a new UN report that's looking at the intersection between racism, technology, and borders that feeds into this broader project too. So I think I will leave it there. Again, I'm sorry for my technical issues. I really wish that we could be in person in the same room together, but hopefully one day we will be able to continue some of these conversations. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Petra. That was really interesting and a really interesting perspective on such a broad issue. But yeah, I think you've left us with some questions that I'm hoping Maddie or Annie are going to stick up on the screen for me, or put them in the chat. That works too. Yes, so there we go. So question 1, is the current legal understanding of refugee enough to protect people in communities? Why do you think certain communities like refugees and people on the move become testing grounds for tech experiments, and what can we do about this? What does meaningful participation of affected refugee communities look like in this space? So we're going to shoot off into our last breakout room, which is going to be 5 minutes again. And when we come back, if we could hear from groups 6, 7 and 2, because there was some confusion in the first feedback session about which group was which. But yes, we will see you in 5 minutes.